Welcome back to this lecture, and we want to talk about what we refer to as quantal dose relationships, yeah? And as I told you earlier, with quantal dose relationships, we are basically interested in you know, what the effect of the drug is to a population, yeah? And in here, we talk about things like one, therapeutic index. So in other words, the quantal dose relationships are used to determine things like therapeutic index, to determine what we call the effective dose at 50, and what we refer to as a toxic dose at 50, or even lethal dose at 50. Now, for us to be able to understand what we are actually talking about, we shall explain, or we shall explain what we are talking about with this, with this graph, as you can see. So that graph, if you can see very well, it has a dose on the x-axis, and it also has a response, yeah? And in this particular context, remember we said quantal dose has to do with the, populations, yeah? So the x-axis, or rather the y-axis, has, individuals, percentage of individuals who are actually responding to that particular drug, yeah? Now, if you still remember, we said that we basically see what we refer to as a sigmoid, yeah, a sigmoid curve. If you still remember what we talked about in those response relationships, especially when the x-axis is being done along the log scale. So as you can see, that very first curve has what we refer to as, has what we refer to as the ED50, and on the y-axis we have actually 50% of individuals who are responding. Yeah, so we refer to that as the effective dose. Yeah. Effective dose at 50. So in other words, what does effective dose at 50 mean? It is that dose, yeah, that dose that will produce an effect in 50%. Yeah, in 50% of the population. Yeah, so it is that dose that produces an effect in 50% of the population. Now, as you increase the amount, or as you increase the dose, it tends to what we call toxic. If you still remember what we said last time, that if you increase the amount, yeah, beyond to what is supposed to be given, then the amount or the dose becomes toxic. And so, as you draw that curve, that sigmoid curve, you see it tends to produce what we call the toxic effect. If you can see up there, yeah, the toxic effect. So that basically means that at 50% of the population, yeah, when you move down, when you extrapolate down along the x-axis, we refer to that as the toxic dose at 50, or the TD50. So in other words, this is the amount, or this is the dose of the drug at which, yeah, the drug becomes toxic in 50% of the population, right? And if you increase the amount, you can see that it eventually becomes lethal. Lethal, it basically means that you give it, the person dies straight away. Yeah, with toxic, it basically means that they can have, the adverse effects of, the high concentration of the drug. They may not necessarily die, but with lethal dose, they have to die. So, however, of course, this is not done among humans, yeah? These studies are not done among humans, of course, because it is unethical to do that. So they are done in animals, yeah, like, rats and all those things, yeah, to determine the lethal dose, to determine the toxic dose and all those things. So with the lethal dose, as you increase the amount, the dose becomes lethal, yeah, and so we see what we refer to as the lethal effect. And once we extrapolate downwards along 50% of the population, we refer to that as the lethal dose at 50, or LD50. So this is the dose at which 50, or this is the dose at which it becomes lethal in about 50% of of the population. So that is what we refer to as the LD50, yeah, LD50, or lethal dose at 50. Now, what is the importance of this? What is the importance of all these 50s, ED50, LTD50, or even LD50? Now, we use this to determine what we refer to as the therapeutic index. Therapeutic index. In this particular context is actually what we refer to the dose, the lethal dose at 50. Or it can be the toxic dose at 50. Divided by the effective dose at 50, yeah? So that is how we determine the therapeutic index, or how we use these Quantal dose relationships to determine what we refer to as the therapeutic index. So it is either lethal dose at 50 divided by effective dose, or toxic dose at 50 divided by the effective dose at 50. That is how we determine the therapeutic index. Yeah, so basically that has been that concerning Quantal dose relationships. And remember, we said we determine these among populations, not just in an individual but in a population. And how do we make use of this is that we use it to determine what we call the effective dose at 50, the lethal dose at 50, and and the toxic dose at 50. And then we should be able to calculate or compute what we refer to as the therapeutic index of that drug. And if you still remember very well, we say that each drug has its own therapeutic index. And again, if you still remember very well, we said that a high therapeutic index, the higher the therapeutic index, then the safer the drug. When we come back, we shall talk about antagonism and agonists, of some of these drugs. In other words, we shall be talking about drug receptor interactions. Thank you.